Hello everybody, I'm going for the wall of books look today. Does it make me look pretentious? Is it credibility? Is it just a bit snobbish and show-offy? I don't know. So you tell me, comment below, tell me, pretentious, snobby, credible, I don't know. Wall of books today. So I've been studying, hence wall of books, I've been studying recently the Greek rhetorical devices used by the author of Acts in Paul's speeches in Acts sort of 13 to 20-ish. And it's made me think an awful lot about how do we do talks, how do we give talks and sermons and messages that are memorable, that are highly retentive, that people go away and go, Joe, I can remember all the main points of that talk and it's going to change my life. And particularly today, I want to give you 4 reasons why our talks aren't always very memorable. They are unmemorable, immemorable, abmemorable, anti-memorable. Reason number 1, and this is going to be a really blasé one, but I think it's true more than we'd like to admit it, which is maybe our talks just aren't very good. Maybe we've spent so much time focused on the content that we've neglected to spend time thinking about the listeners, or vice versa. You've made it really relevant and clear to the people in the room, but you really phoned in the content, you didn't do a lot of research, and you're giving them a feel-good message that basically says nothing. Or it's late one night, you've got to throw a sermon together before the next morning, and you've just phoned it in, but you know they'll probably come back next week, so you're not too fussed. It might be, just might be, that one of the reasons our talks are not very memorable is because we're not giving them the time or the energy or the effort or the headspace that they're worth to do them well. We're not seeking training, we're not seeking to develop our speaking voice, we're not thinking about how do we translate content into meaning, into speakers' ears, listeners' ears, and then into the hearts, and maybe our talks just aren't very good. Reason number 1, maybe we need to just, write better talks. Number two, second reason why often our talks are not very memorable is we've got a habit of perhaps bloating the message with too much unnecessary detail. So I began this today by telling you about my wall of books and by telling you about my rhetoric examination of Luke and Paul, and all that's unnecessary to the content. I could have just jumped right in. And often we've done some research and we just want to get every point in there. We want to say everything, and so we bloat our talks with unnecessary information. We have to tell them all about where in modern day Turkey this particular part of Paul's missionary journey was and how long he was there and what kind of hummus he ate. And it just gets a bit bloated, and people don't know when to tune in and out, and they don't know when the conveyor belt of information is coming past them, which bits they're meant to take and retain, and which bits are there just either for your buffer or your ego. And so sometimes we need to thin out the unnecessary information. This is making a distinction between teaching and preaching. Teaching is important, we do have to teach, but teaching is a transferal of information. Preaching is an invitation to a changed life. There's always room to give more information, there's not always room to help people have opportunities to live a changed life. And that for me is what I'm talking about today, preaching for a purpose that changes lives. So maybe reason number 2, you are bloating your talks with too much unnecessary information. I'm going to change hands. I really should use a tripod, but there we go. Oh, that arm was getting tired. Reason number 3 is you don't have a rhetorical refrain. Rhetorical devices are things that help the orator deliver their message in such a way that people receive it, get it, and are changed by it. Now, one of those is a refrain. Now, before I explain exactly what I mean by a refrain, I believe that every talk that you give, you should be able to explain very clearly in one sentence. And a refrain should invite people to know what that sentence is, either their own version of it or a version that you gave them. Your refrain should invite them to recall the main point of your talk. And I'm a big believer in the main point. I think you should preach 1 point 3 ways rather than preaching 3 points 1 way each. It makes more sense to address multiple learning styles to make sure that everyone has understood and taken away your main point so you can build on it each week. So the refrain will invite people to remember the main point. So I'm preaching tomorrow, and my main point is when trouble comes, when hardship, when difficulty, when sickness, when struggle, when you can't make ends meet, you need to run to God, run to Him and call on Him instinctively. He should be your first thought that comes into your head. When everything goes rubbish, you need to calibrate your senses to push into Him. And my refrain is, where do you run? Who do you call? And I ask that question, where do you run? Who do you call? Probably about 30 times throughout the talk. It's the first thing I say, the last thing I say. Now I'm using that refrain to invite the listener to create a mental connection between an easy to learn, easy to remember phrase and a solution, which is I need to run to God, my safety and my strength. I need to call upon Him when I'm in trouble. It's reminding them for a simple phrase that you were just feeding in softly throughout the message repeatedly so they can recall to mind for themselves their own cognitive building of what they've taken away from the main point of the talk. That was quite a long-winded way of saying I use a refrain because it reminds them what the talk was about. You don't want the refrain to be the main point because the refrain is there to jog a memory. You don't want it to become the memory. Because when your memory is jogged, when you start working at remembering what the answer to the question was, you start creating your own neural pathways and you start owning it for yourself. You don't want the refrain to be the main point. You want the refrain to invite them to construct again the main point in their own words, in their own understanding. Other refrains I've used recently is, do you look for a wound in all the wrong places? Do you have a Jesus and gospel? Do you see, do you go, do you love? Often for me, they're questions because it's hard to hear a question without subconsciously trying to answer it. But a refrain doesn't have to be a question. Thing number one, write better talks. Thing number two is make sure you're not over bloating your talk with unnecessary information. Thing number three is have a refrain. And thing number four is make sure you are presenting your message in balance. What I mean by that is intro, points equally weighted in terms of time and space and energy, and a conclusion. And it's simple, and when you get really, really good at these things, you can mess with that. But people will not know where to settle their attention. They will not know where to gather their thoughts if you're going through a different cycle for each point you want to bring out. If point one takes you 25 minutes and point two takes you 10 minutes and point three takes you 20 minutes and point four takes you 2 minutes, people are learning through your speaking style to pay attention to the wrong bits in the wrong order. It actually makes sense to make sure that each of your points are equally weighted, equally balanced, and signpost into each other. You need to walk your listener to learn subconscious, what's called epistemological habits, that their thoughts are being jogged at the right time, in the right order, about the right thing. So make sure that you're spending equal time on each of your main points, so you're moving people through sequentially and inviting them to create the story in their own head with as little content loss as possible. Okay, this is probably not a massively memorable YouTube video because I'm spouting this a little bit at the top of my head, and maybe that brings me to point one, which is do it better, do research, write it down, think about it. But really, these are 4 reasons why I think people are not remembering our talks. Often, 1, we're just not spending enough effort on them, and we do need to put effort into our teaching. Number 2 is we are over bloating sections of our talks with too much information. Reason 3 is we're not using rhetorical devices like refrains to proper effect that invites the listener to recreate the main point in their own words and their own experience, so it becomes owned by them. And thing number 4, reason number 4, is often our talks are misbalanced or disbalanced in a way that trips up your listener into tuning out when you need them to tune in. So 4 reasons right there that our talks aren't memorable, 4 things to reverse and do better. Hopefully that's useful. I'm going to rest my hand. I'm sure this camera's really shaky. I really should use a tripod, but my hand is like, and yeah, it's time to go pick my wife up from work. So I wish you all the best and adieu, and do comment any more ideas you've got. There are plenty of them, and let me know if this has been helpful, because it's nice to hear this has been helpful. Anyway, all the best. God bless. See you again.